All right, hey family, we are back again with our BJC Bethlehem-Judah Church Black History African American Read In. We are so excited. This has been a phenomenal month. We all love to celebrate Black history, and we just haven't done it in this way before. And so we kind of wanted to come at it at a different perspective, a different way. And so we linked up with the National teachers of English. I'm saying that right. I think I missed a letter, but we joined up with them and we wanted to just present this in a different way because a lot of times we don't get into reading a lot sometimes. And so we wanted to really push reading. We wanted to push it in our young people and our children, and even starting off as babies. We want to encourage parents to start off reading with their babies and moving on up all the way to teenage and just really to never stop. And so our first two segments were for our children, and so this one, y'all, we wanted to come at a different age range and let our teenagers know that we rooting for them too. We going all in for them too. And so we have some amazing men that have joined us today to be our special guests to read and to discuss. And so I hope y'all are ready because this is going to be amazing. If you all know them, if you don't know them, I'm going to do my best to do a quick short bio on them so you know where we coming from and what kind of heavyweights we got with us today. So we're going to start. Listen, y'all can be modest, but it's on me. I got it. I know who y'all are. So I'm going to go ahead and pump it real quick. Okay. So we have with us our own pastor, Elder Eric L. Howard. He is joining us today. He is, and y'all know I don't remember information that well, so I might even mess this up. And so, Pastor, if I mess it up a little bit, you just gonna have to jump on in, okay?
Be all right.
He's a graduate of Wayne State University. Well, he's a native of Detroit, y'all, okay? And he is a graduate of Wayne State University.
Not a
He is
graduate. Not a grad. I was one of those that had some trouble hanging out in the student center. Um, and so I didn't quite graduate, but I did attend studying electrical and computer engineering and left from there to pursue a career in information security. At that time, there were no degrees being granted around information security. And so I found a route to something that interested me and through a certification path. And so that led to the career that the Lord then gave me. But I am, by God's grace, headed back to school this summer, headed towards an MDiv, so a Master's of Divinity, and then prayerfully doing some stuff going towards a PhD. We'll see. We'll see what the Lord says. So.
awesome. So that is amazing in itself, just real quick, that didn't graduate, but look at how many great things that you're doing and to have
God's
been
good.
yes, he is to be the first African American in that area to be able to integrate two systems, information.
Companies. Yeah. So there were two information security companies that I was the first Black engineer employed at these companies, one in Southfield, Michigan, another based out of Baltimore, Maryland. And again, just the first one to walk through those doors. I attribute it to something my dad did when I was 12 years old, but I don't have time to go into that today. But my dad took my summer away and made me go to something called Kids College. And he prophetically said, I'll never know what computers are about, but the world is headed this way and you need to know it. And it changed the trajectory of my whole life. So.
There you go. Amen. So all right, so there we go. Heavy weight hitter number one. Here we go on the next one. Carl Jackson. He is a proud husband, father, and he's a native Detroit too, y'all. He's an amateur historian, but Carl has had an interest in historical events as far back as he can remember. Okay, teachings and conversations with elders led to both independent and collegiate study of historical individuals and events, specifically events that have particular relevance to the Black American experience. Carl has reviewed and studied the philosophies of several Black historians, theologians, academics, and civil rights leaders to shape his thoughts around where the Black community stands and, more importantly, how best to improve its condition. When he is not studying or sharing his philosophies, Carl works for a national healthcare provider as a workforce planner. He's been married to his beautiful wife, April, for almost 25 years, and they have 3 adult, beautiful daughters. I know 2 of them, and they are amazing. And if that's any testament to both of these men, actually, their daughters, they both are girl dads. And so just the information, the conversations that I've had with their daughters, and just to see what they're doing, even in this community and in as young Black women, is a testament to how great you all are as fathers and what God has allowed you all to do. So we're excited. And so that means it's going to be great for our teenagers and any young adults or whoever, because they live this, y'all. Okay. So
I like to say I was a girl dad before the hashtag. And so
okay.
Same here. Same here. Same here.
Before we get into this, I just want to thank you for bringing this up as a concept and an idea. Alicia, you serve as one of the youth pastors here at Bethlehem-Judah Church, and you're always thinking about how we can connect other things to what we do with our youth and our children. And so being connected to a lot of the work you do around social work, et cetera, bringing this program, I thought was a wonderful thing. Reading, they used to tell us reading is fundamental, right? Because there's so much knowledge locked up in books. And I know there are many other communication methods by which knowledge is conveyed today, but there's so much in books that if we don't do a good job of kind of pushing this as a route to not just dream, right? Because books can open up your path forward, but also to gain historical grounding. We're going to miss out on a lot. We're going to repeat a lot of the same errors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's in that vein that when you ask if I would participate, absolutely. But then I thought about, as we talked about targeting this, Carl, because I see how Carl moves, especially as it is on social media. He is all things pro-Black. Amen. And so if you follow Carl on social media, you will see how he moves, how he promotes. And then I don't think we mentioned it, right? He's a business owner. He launched a coffee business not long ago. And so if you drink coffee, buy his coffee. If you don't, buy his coffee for somebody who does. But support.
I like the way you think.
Amen. support this businessman as he is taking his dreams and pushing them into reality and raising children to do the same. So I just want to add that in before we get into this discussion.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. And it's my pleasure. I love what we stand for at Bethlehem-Judah. And so I'm just excited to be here with you all. So I'm not going to delay because I know we only have a short amount of time to discuss such a heavy piece. And so I want to let you all know, for those that are listening and watching, we are going over today The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B Du Bois, or Du Bois, whichever way. If you're French, you pronounce it probably Du Bois. If you're just us regular folk, you probably say Du Bois. But and it's we're coming from the 3rd chapter, which is of why I'm forgetting that quick.
Mr. Booker T. Washington and others.
And others, I'm sorry. And so I want you all to take a listen. We're not going to read the whole thing, but they're going to read points that stand out to them that particularly can be of relevance to today. We know that there's nothing new under the sun. So a lot of things are repeated. And so we want to bring out things that's going to help us to kind of continue to be catapulted forward, move forward, how to navigate through life. So if it's only adults listening, if you know some teens, go grab some teenagers or some young adults. If you want to shoot this to them very quickly, just share on your page. We would really appreciate it, because we want this knowledge to get down on the inside of them. And then I also want to just encourage you all to type some questions in. They're going to be discussing. I might throw in some questions, but it would be very good if you all that are listening have any questions of how this relates to young people, and just something that can get their minds going. Okay. And so, all right, we're ready. I'm going to go ahead and let you all have at it.
Sure. Thank you. So we're reading from Du Bois' list of essays, The Souls of Black Folk. And in particular, what we're going to focus on tonight are elements from the essay of Mr. Booker T. Washington and others. And before we get into that and kind of dive into some of our thoughts, we're not going to be able to read the whole thing, but we're going to pull out some key points and paragraphs out of it and just have some time of discussion. But the foreword really sets the tone for what Du Bois is trying to do here. So I'm just going to read one piece, not the whole paragraph, one piece of a paragraph of the foreword, and then we'll go ahead and get into the actual essay itself. If you don't have this book, this is a good time to grab this compilation. It's free on Apple iBooks, on Kindle, especially this month. It's free for the download. You can buy a copy, but this book has a lot of just very potent content, even to consider now, right? Well over 100 years later, that as I mentioned, books do a great job of opening the mind towards the future. But if we abandon what they give us historically, we are doomed quite often to make similar, if not the same, mistake. And so here's the foreword that's kind of going to give us a little bit of push to go forward. He says here, this is Du Bois writing. I have sought here to sketch in vague, uncertain outline the spiritual world in which 10,000 Americans live and strive. First, in 2 chapters, he's talking about the first 2 essays as they lay out in the book. I've tried to show what emancipation meant to them and what was its aftermath. In a 3rd chapter, this is the piece that Carl and I are going to get into, I have pointed out the slow rise of personal leadership and criticized candidly the leader who bears the chief burden of his race today. Then in 2 other chapters, I've sketched in swift outline the 2 worlds within and without the veil. He views this whole thing of being Black as a hidden thing that nobody can really understand unless you are inside of the veil. And he's like, I'm going to leave the white world that you all have said I am from, because Du Bois, right? He's PhD from Harvard and he's European educated and all this other kind of stuff. And they're like, you and your NAACP guys, y'all from a whole different world. He's like, I'm going to leave the white world y'all said I'm from, and I'm going to begin to dig into our shared Black experiences. He accounts it as living inside of a veil. He says, and so there's some things that we'll uncover there. So let's get to chapter 3 of Mr. Booker T. Washington and others. So to start this off, first and foremost, here's why this is even critical and important. When you look at post-emancipation and Reconstruction, there is a rise of leadership that comes up. Frederick Douglass dies, others try to come up in the scene, but there is one who rises up who is like the leader amongst Black folk in the South, and it's Booker T. Washington. He is beloved by many, misunderstood by a lot, and then there are people who just got a problem with what he says. He does something that is, we'll see, we may read it tonight. He does something that is later called the Atlanta Compromise. He tries to bring together Black folks in the South, white folks in the South, and basically he kind of says, look, just don't bother us. Let us build our own stuff, get our own education. We won't bother y'all with the right to vote and all these other kind of things. Let us build. And he is accused of being, conciliatory and a placater and all these other kind of things. And so Du Bois' essay in this particular chapter is, as it were, some of a rebuke, some of an explanation of his issues, his problems with some of the things laid out, and then, of course, as he is wont to do, some offerings of other things. So with that said, we're going to start reading right here. Easily, I'm in the very first paragraph. Easily the most striking thing in the history of the American Negro since 1876 is the ascendancy of Mr. Booker T. Washington. It began at the time when war memories and ideals were rapidly passing. A day of astonishing commercial development was dawning. A sense of doubt and hesitation overtook the freedmen's sons. Then it was that his leading began. Mr. Washington came with a simple, definite program, at the psychological moment when the nation was a little ashamed of having bestowed so much sentiment on Negroes and was concentrating its energies on dollars. His program of industrial education, conciliation of the South, and submission and silence as to civil and political rights. So he calls out a few things right there. He said, this is Du Bois saying this was the platform that Booker T. Washington stood on. Industrial education, conciliation of the South, submission and silence as to civil and political rights. It was not wholly original. The free Negroes from 1830 up to wartime had striven to build industrial schools, and the American Missionary Association had from the first taught various trades. And Price and others had sought a way of honorable alliance with the best of the Southerners. But Mr. Washington first indissolubly linked these things. He put enthusiasm, unlimited energy, and perfect faith into his program and changed it from a bypass into a veritable way of life. And the tale of the methods by which he did this is a fascinating study of human life. The next paragraph, and then we're going to start talking. It startled the nation to hear a Negro advocating such a program after many decades of bitter complaint. It startled and won the applause of the South. It interested and won the admiration of the North. And after a confused murmur of protest, it silenced, if did not convert, the Negroes themselves. Carl, I know you've read this essay a few times. When you read this and he begins to kind of, I won't say tear into it, but he begins to kind of lay out what he thinks Booker T. Washington's approach was. How did you kind of first see this, man, when the first time you read it?
Well, first, let me just say again, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it for you and you, Pastor and Sister Chuck. When I read this, I always want to read it through the lens of who's writing it. Yeah. So when I look at it, and you did a good job of touching on Booker T. Washington's background and his thought processes in terms of, you know, what his plan for the Negro was at that time. But you also have to look at the writer. Du Bois was not born a slave like Booker T. Washington was. He was not born in the South. He was born in Massachusetts. He was from a well-to-do family. Yes, he was Harvard educated. I think one of the greatest quotes that I have attributed to him is when he was the first PhD, Black PhD recipient from Harvard, and he said the pleasure was all yours.
All yours.
So this is the lens which you have to read it. So when you're looking at it from someone who's never had to deal with the I want to say at that time, well, what I'll say is the angst of Reconstruction, the growing pains of Reconstruction, and then turning into, at the turn of the century, you're starting to fall into the Jim Crow era. So he's not coming from a conciliatory space. He's coming from, we're men, we're free men. This is the way this is in this country right now. And what you're doing is selling us short. So when I read it as a native Detroiter.
Yeah.
Someone who, again, I'm not from the South. Most of my grandparents had been, though some of them were born in the North, the other ones were migrated here at an early age. So I really didn't have a lot of connection to the South. So with that, my interpretation of Du Bois was, okay, I can see where you're going. Yeah. As you said, as we go on, I know there's a couple of passages that I would touch on, you or I would touch on, that really kind of spoke more to even a modern day approach to what Du Bois is thinking. So yeah, I look at it from, here's somebody who is very distant, and there's also an age difference. Du Bois is 10 years younger than Booker T. Washington. So, even now, you talk to somebody who's 30, and if you're 40, there's going to be some different experiences that you've had. So all of that plays into that part of the essay.
I agree, man. I think that You called out a couple things. If I pivoted on the other side, and we didn't set this up right for Carl to be on one side, me to be on the other, y'all. We just talking. We just talking. But I agree, right? We certainly bring a lot of that to it when we, from our native Detroiter, Northerner, education pushed, all these other kind of things, right? We certainly bring that to the immediate read. But if I try to step back and kind of feel out, okay, where was Booker T. Washington coming from? And in his mind, right, this is not a conciliatory thing. I am trying to get us to a place where we can uplift all and skill and trade, right? The standard, right, which was A and T universities, right? There's a reason we got so many A and T universities in the HBCU ecosystem, because the key to him was we've got the skill that this country needs. And right now, they need workers, and they're going to have to pay them because we're free. Mm-hmm. And so let's make them pay us to do what we did for free. Mm-hmm. And that was a little bit of his approach and his thought. And I can see that need, right? To, you know what, let's make sure we got our own skill to build our own stuff, right? We the ones that knew how to work the farm. We the one that knew how to train the animals. We the one that knew how to fix the equipment. We're the ones that knew how to do this stuff. Mm-hmm. And so why don't we then make ourselves marketable, if you will, rather than just pursue education for education's sake, was really kind of what Booker T kind of brought to his whole thing. Education's good, but hey, we got to work to eat. Education, it ain't good just to sit there reading French while you sitting on a farm that need to be plowed, right? So those are some of the things he went through. So jumping to another chapter, I'm gonna jump because again, we don't have time. I want to try to connect the dots though to what we just read, which was the whole piece on staging what they thought was kind of Booker T. Washington's link of his advocacy for, again, industrial education, his advocacy for what they consider conciliation, and then the whole notion of submission and silences, civil and political rights. I think that was probably the one that stood out more than anything else, to be honest. I think that was probably the one that bothered most of the opponents to the Atlanta Compromise. Like, wait a minute, we ain't gonna let them. We're gonna let them get away with not letting us vote. We're gonna let them get away with not doing anything for us after all that time.
Especially right after Reconstruction, when we elected a record number of Black representatives, governors, senators, congressmen. We had representation across the board, and that slowly eroded from the time of Reconstruction up until the time, I believe this book was written in 1904. So those things had already started to peel back. So again, you can't give someone a right that is afforded to everyone else that is considered a citizen in this country, and then start to roll it back, especially as, again, coming from a free man side of things. This is something that we've always, we should have always had it. So we can't give that up and forsake of right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is a right. It is a right. So continuing, next chapter. To gain the sympathy and cooperation of the various elements comprising the white South was Mr. Washington's first task. And this, at the time Tuskegee was founded, seemed for a Black man well nigh impossible. And yet 10 years later, it was done in the word spoken at Atlanta. And here are the words that make up what they call the Atlanta Compromise. In all things purely social, we can be as separate as the 5 fingers, but yet one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress. So Booker T never called it the Atlanta Compromise. That's what people who criticized it called it. The Atlanta Compromise is by all odds the most notable and I should say it's of note that we actually don't even have a writing from the Atlanta Compromise from Booker T. Washington's own words. He didn't put it in writing that we have today. And so a lot has been lost to that. And a lot of this is from the perspective of those that were kind of commenting on it. But it says this Atlanta Compromise is by all odds the most notable thing in Mr. Washington's career. So everything else he did, this is the most notable, he says. The South interpreted it in different ways. The radicals received it as a complete surrender of the demand for civil and political equality. The conservatives as a generously conceived working basis for mutual understanding. So both approved it, and today its author is certainly the most distinguished Southerner since Jefferson Davis, and the one with the largest personal following. And I don't think he was throwing dirt at him, but the truth is that Booker T. Washington had a whole lot of folks on his side because of his approach. He had the bigger following. The NAACP was not beloved, not especially not in the South. It was not beloved as an organization with an ideal or a thought. Did I cut you off, Carl?
No.
Jump in, please. Stop me, please. Jump in. Next to this achievement comes Mr. Washington's work in gaining place and consideration in the North. So after he'd done this work in the South, right, talked to Southern strategy, he had his own Southern strategy, so to speak, right? He went after those who were in control, in power, who did begin to pull back the gains that we made through Reconstruction, begin to really build up what we now know as Jim Crow, and begin to really subjugate the Negro, as they're called throughout these essays at that time. Well, he did his work there, but now I've got to convince a whole nother set of people, because we can't have Northerners coming down disturbing what we're trying to build down here. And so now Booker T says, I got to go do some work up north. So next to this achievement comes Mr. Washington's work in gaining place and consideration in the North. Others less shrewd and tactful had formerly essayed to sit on these two stools and had fallen between them. So other people tried to kind of bridge this stuff, he said, and it didn't work. But as Mr. Washington knew, so you said this, Carl, right? Mr. Washington knew the heart of the South from birth and training. He became a freedman. So by singular insight, he intuitively grasped the spirit of the age, which was dominating the North. I'm not from up there, but I get where they're coming from, and I can speak to that. And so thoroughly did he learn the speech and thought of triumphant commercialism. We could stop right there for a moment. Because he knew. Go ahead, please.
No, well, and I think what you kind of touched upon it a little bit earlier too. We're not pitted against each other, even in this discussion. And I think that a lot of times that's what we try to do. We try to pit things against each other, say it's either black or white, it's either A or B. And they both had the same goal. They both had the same goal. They wanted the race to progress. They had different viewpoints about it. So yes, as he was saying, now Booker T's coming to the North. And I think that if you were to have his speeches or listen to his talks, he would say, don't you want to have your own? Don't you want to be successful? Don't you want to have thriving communities? Don't you want to be industrious and build something for yourselves and your families? That's all great. That's you're going to hear, yes, sure. Well, let's do that. Let's form ourselves. Let's do some cooperative economics, but let's not worry ourselves basically with the white man's business at this point. Let's get ourselves together. And I think that's where Du Bois is coming in and saying, all of that sounds good, but we need to have the other rights as well. We need to have a full cadre of rights, not just our own factory or a living wage. Yeah. So,
and that's not just a thing from the turn of the century, 19th century, right? We saw that later in successive Black leaders, right? From Marcus Garvey, right? We saw in Garveyanism this whole thing of build our own. Let's have our own. We did it, in fact, right? If you consider stuff like Black Wall Street, we did that very thing. But to your point, Du Bois was like, yeah, let's do both, though. We can't ignore the basic human civil right, the decency that needs to be afforded to all people for the sake of commercialism. And so I think that he even calls that out himself is key, right? So people would say, okay, all you worried about is your own, build your own, Booker T. Du Bois says, I see it. He knew that commercialism was where this country had turned. And if we're going to speak and talk to the folk that are in control of the dollars, we need to speak their language. Commercialism is the conversation that needs to be had. But like you just said, we can't use that as a catch-all when people are going to lose critical human rights, civil rights, as we now call them, in this nation, that we're free men. We're free men.
And in particular, the political power. Because in the essay and in this, as we can see through history, we can lose gains that are gotten if we don't have the political power to sustain them. So when you get into we're not going to bother, and this is one of Booker T's conciliatory efforts, so to speak, which is why it was called the Atlanta Compromise. One of his compromises was, well, we don't have to vote right now. If you I know you spoke to it earlier, and like you said, just leave us alone, let us do our thing, and if you want to be in power, in office, and so forth, we'll let you have that, but we're going to go ahead and do our thing. And I think that, as we found out in different, like you said, in Black Wall Street, in Greensboro, North Carolina, and Rosewood, Florida, and in countless other places throughout the country, when we do build our own communities, if we don't have the political power to sustain them and protect them, then they can be stripped away very easily. I don't know if Du Bois had that type of forethought, but it determines to be critical.
Absolutely.
To sustain it. So
it's a necessary thing. We can't avoid one for the other from either side.
Exactly.
We can't. And so the last line I'll read from this, and then I want you to kind of point us at something you want to make sure we get into today, so I don't dominate all the time. So the last line I'm going to read from this, right? So Mr. Washington knew the heart of the South, etc. The spirit of the age dominating the North, right? He learned the speech and thought of triumphant commercialism and the ideals of material prosperity, that the picture, and so this is the kind of the way it was kind of juxtaposed against each other, right? The picture of a lone Black boy poring or reading over a French grammar, a book, amid the weeds and dirt of a neglected home, soon seemed to him the acme of absurdity. This is the grounding of that. Fine, you know French, but you ain't got nothing. You can speak languages, but you look what you have, nothing. And so this to Booker T was just like, this is ridiculous. If that's the way we're going to go. I don't think he was anti-education. I think he was more the style of education should fit where the need is currently. And to him, he felt agriculture and technical stuff. Let's do that and then build upon that. And then the last one wonders what Socrates and St. Francis of Assisi would say to this. I could say a whole lot about that. Socrates and St. Francis of Assisi. I think that was a miss. That's just a personal opinion. I think that was a miss from Du Bois to even bring them into the conversation as relates to the context of the time. And so what we've done, y'all, just a quick reset as we get ready to pivot into some more paragraphs out of this chapter, is we've looked at the grounding of why we're even reading this, that Du Bois had some critiques against what is called the Atlanta Compromise, led by Booker T. Washington, the most popular Black man of that time, far beyond Du Bois and anybody else, especially the NAACP leaders. And there was a little bit of contention over what's the right approach to help Black folk move forward. He then spends the next few chapters really kind of detailing and outlining. He makes the path through, which is why I want y'all to get it and read it. He makes the path through pre-slavery, and he talks about how folks in this country were scared of revolt coming because they looked at the Black Danes and all these other groups. He looks at slavery and post-slavery. He looks at the Haitian revolt and all these other kind of things that they're like, these Black folks gonna get stirred up. And so he begins to talk about how there have been leaders that have stood up from time and time again. He brings up the big names we know and some that we don't. And how Booker T. Washington really kind of falls into the same path that many of them do. So that's kind of the grounding. Carl, where do you want to go on this essay?
Well, I want to go into, this is just me. I'm really into the political side of it, and I'm really
that's all good, brother.
I'm really into like the power that we have that we don't realize we have sometimes, that we sometimes can see. Yeah. So one of the things that he says here is, so he says, Mr. Washington distinctly asked Black people to give up at least for the present, three things. First, political power. Second, insistence on civil rights. Third, higher education of Negro youth, and to concentrate all their industrial education and accumulation of wealth and conciliation of the South. So then he says, so I'm going to skip ahead here a little bit. As a result of this tender palm branch, what is the return? So he's saying what is happening so far. So he said, in these years, there have occurred the disenfranchisement of the Negro, the illegal, I don't have my glasses on. So.
You're good. It's legal. The legal creation. Yeah.
The legal creation of distinct statuses of civil inferiority for the Negro, and steady withdrawal of aid from institutions from the higher training of the Negro. Yeah. So when you talk about those things, and he says in here a little bit, I'm gonna go a little bit further. Those movements are not, to be sure, direct results of Mr. Washington's teaching, but his propaganda has, without a doubt, helped their speedier accomplishment. Yeah. So I think with that, he's saying more so that his talking has given the white power structure the permission to subtract those things. Mm-hmm. A lot of what Washington, and as you said, if you are in the South and you are from the South at that time, what he talks is it's great. We can exist. We can build for ourselves. And this is just an aside. I always like to throw this in because this just always blows my mind. I had a great grandmother who was born in 1896, and I was blessed to have her well into my adulthood. And she was from Alabama. And one day, just in casual conversation, she dropped, Booker T came to our school when I was in elementary school. And I said, who? And she said, Booker T. I said, Booker T. Washington? She was like, yeah. And I'm saying, what? Because as you said, he was the most popular person of that time. So I don't know if it was, I guess maybe Barack Obama or maybe the equivalent. If somebody walked into there and whatever they had to say is going to resonate with you. And at that time, she was well into her 90s, and it was almost like she was, it was still like very, very, very fond memory. Wow. So whatever he was selling, and I'll just put that in quotation marks, whatever he was selling, they were going to buy. Yep. However, when you look at what Du Bois is, when he starts talking about political power, civil rights being stripped away, those type of things don't resonate very well in the North. They don't resonate very well now. I think that even with this past election season, we all know what happened. We all know the turmoil that it went through. And a lot of people were saying, well, voting doesn't matter. Well, if you go all the way back to, 1904 and before that, here are two opposing sides, because here's what we would hear nowadays. Here's what you hear, and this is what a lot of young people say. Well, voting don't matter. Just get your business and let's get it going. Right. Right. Get in your bags. So if you're gonna talk to the young people, get your bag. I'm about to start a business. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm gonna get in. Okay. And they're not competing ideals. They have to work together. Yeah. So here they're shown as competing ideals. And I think that had those two men really, and from what I can read and from what I've studied, they really had a genuine dislike of each other. Yeah. Yeah. So there wasn't a sit down, so to speak, or let's kind of come together and talk about it and see how we can both work together or both come to some type of compromise ourselves. Mm-hmm. It was really this one or that one. And that's kind of where a lot of where we are now. Like you said, you spoke about the Garveyism going through. You spoke about, King and Malcolm X, those being supposedly diametrically opposed positions, which they are not. If you really look at those men and really look at what they were saying, especially Dr. King in the last 2 years of his life, he was more like Malcolm X than Malcolm X was almost. Absolutely. So you have to look at, let's go back and look at what these men were saying and kind of glean from them. You know, you have to, everything is not for everybody, but you have to find the importance of it on both sides. So that's just kind of where I go with that.
No, I feel you, man. I think that piece. So when I looked at that piece, kind of just trying to get ready for the night, that piece jumped out at me too, for a lot of the reasons you said. But as I read it, I was like, man, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Like, okay, look at this and look at where we are. Look at what we said we give up, what we stopped fighting for. And look at the results. Unintended consequences is how I look at it, right? This is not necessarily what we wanted to happen, but as a result of the path we took, it is what happened. And so the disenfranchisement of the Negro. Sometimes we read these lines, and because of the word there, we don't apply it back to us. We don't, right? He said the disenfranchisement of the Negro, the disenfranchisement of Black folks. Take Negro out, put yourself in there for a minute and understand. I mean, come on. If we look at even the political machinations happening around electioneering in Georgia over the last couple of weeks and what it takes to be able to vote, right? And so you can't tell me that there is not still some work of disenfranchisement. And I'm not pointing at a party at all, because I'm sure you know me, Carl. I got problems with both of them. I got problems with
as you should, as we all should.
As we all should. But there is a work of disenfranchisement that is certainly going on. Now, we could talk about whether it's purely race or whether it's social economic. I think it's both. I don't think it's one or the other. And at the end of the day, I think that's what we miss if we purely assign the disagreements between Washington and Du Bois to race, that it is not just race. It also trying to address a social economic platform that causes the people to rise up together and be able to build and hold and have legacy and pass on to their lineage and leave something behind, right? I don't know about you, but my people never got their 40 acres. And so I'm trying to find mine. I'm literally looking at land every few weeks. I'm looking at land and trying to see what I can buy. I told them they can keep the mule. I'll buy a 4x4. I don't want a mule.
Get a tractor now. We need a
give
tractor.
Me my 40 acres, but I don't want a mule. Give me something I can work the land with, though. The legal creation of a distinct status of civil inferiority for the Negro. He says legally, y'all went and made this thing. You codified it. It was a kind of an observed thing, an action thing. But because we stepped back and stopped holding their feet to the fire, they were able to codify it, put it in law. And now look at where we are. Inferior in terms of status. And then the last one, that third one, I mean, you can't tell me you don't see these things even today. The steady withdrawal of aid from institutions for the higher training of the Negro. I don't know about you, I see these things. I'm like, man, the first thing I thought was the more things change, the more they stay the same. We're still fighting a lot of these issues.
And he's trying to tell him in that particular passage, you're fighting against yourself, because by that time, Tuskegee had been established.
Yep.
And the government was very much so invested in keeping Tuskegee up and running, as long as they were apolitical.
Yeah.
As long as they were doing, okay, we can train you to be farmers and kind of work for yourselves and do other types of things. And a lot of it, and this is again, no shade to any type of profession or any type of way you make your living, as long as it's legal. But, Tuskegee was training you to be a better porter or a better cobbler or better, and like I said, nothing wrong with those things.
Yeah.
But when you're coming from a PhD from Harvard, and yes, Du Bois was very bourgeoisie, and yes, he did look down on quite a few things and people, and had no problems with doing that. But when you do those things and you say, okay, you can be that, but Du Bois's thing was that's all you're ever going to be, and don't you want more? I think Booker T's lens was, if we are the best that we can be at these things, then eventually the respect will come.
Yeah.
And as you said later on in this chapter, Du Bois even kind of speaks more to that, saying there's been no historical evidence that that's going to happen.
Right.
So we need to demand what we need to demand right now. We can't say, well, we're going to do the best we can now and then just hope that they like us later. And again, like as you said, the more things change, the more things sound the same. I hear a lot of now, well, we have to do better for ourselves and we have to do this in order for us to be treated a certain way. Mm-hmm. You know, we have to speak better. We need to dress better. We need to carry ourselves in a particular way. And we can see historical evidence as we've done that. Communities have done that. And that's just not the way that a supremacist attitude takes. They're always going to believe they're supremacist. And I think Du Bois really wants to say that we're on an equal footing. His method was, you know, educational aspirations and educational acumen would show that. And we, as well as political power. So that's where that's where that diametric is not meshing. But the two things that we keep talking about over and over again, and that tonight they have to work together. They have to.
I mean, so there was certainly disdain one for the other, but in truth, they were striving for a similar goal from two different approaches. Did you have another chapter you wanted to get, a paragraph you wanted to get to, or because I got one I wanted to pull out real quick.
Go ahead.
So we talk about it from Du Bois' standpoint of being a disagreement, but Du Bois begins to call out some of the disagreement within the people that had been supporting Booker T at one point. And so he says in this particular chapter, there's a class of Negroes who cannot agree with Mr. Washington and have hitherto said little aloud, right? They've got some scattered counsel, they got some internal disagreement, but they haven't said a whole lot. But here, nevertheless, the questions involved are so fundamental and serious that it's difficult to see how men like the Grimkeys, Kelly Miller, W.E.B Bois, and other representatives of this group can much longer be silent. He says, I see some of your men in your group starting to rise up saying we're taking the wrong approach. The effects that we did not expect are happening to us. Such men feel in conscience bound to ask of this nation three things. 1, the right to vote. 2, civic equality. 3, the education of youth according to ability. He said, within your own camp, you're starting to see some men who are starting to speak a little differently and saying, we want to get to this point, but if we don't cover these things off, we're going to miss a key thing in our future. And while we know, right, I mean, we're believers, we understand that human foibles will never make everything fair, never make everything just, right? Justice comes from God in every color. I don't care what adjective you put on the front of it, social, economic, whatever you want to put on it. Justice comes from God. But you still don't have the right to beat me. You still don't have the right to enslave me. You still don't have the right to treat me any kind of way. And so he was saying there needs to be a level of civic equality, of fairness across the board that we're all connected to. And then the education of youth according to ability. And so he said, these three things, you're going to start to see this, Booker T. You're going to start to see your men say, we're losing ground. We may be gaining in some of these areas, but we're losing ground. Here's the thing that I want to call out before we move out of this, is that as successive generations lose sight of what a struggle was, because you called this out earlier, Du Bois 10 years younger than Booker T. He is a freed man. He doesn't know slavery. He doesn't have the experiences of the South. If we look at our own generations coming after us, and if they don't understand some of the things that it took for us to become who we are, be where we are, the things we've had to battle through as a people, not just, you and your family, as a people, they do begin to lose sight of the need for some of this call to action, as the need for some of these things, the need, why are we marching? Why are we doing this? Why are we still doing it? And I get it. One side of me is like, we shouldn't still have to do this. I agree with you wholeheartedly. We should not still have to. But evidently something got to be said. Evidently somebody gotta raise a banner and call attention to problems. How do you think, Carl? I mean, let's bring this to some of the young adults and teens that might see this now, watch later, that don't understand why we even would go back over 100 years on a conversation between two dead men and try to apply it to today, into this generation, and we've had a black president and all these other kind of things.
Well, it's what you spoke to earlier. It's still very relevant. The issues that are raised over 100 years ago, even prior to that, the writings of Frederick Douglass, they're still very, very relevant. And that's the sad part. Especially, like you said, speaking over the last year, I mean, 2020, we know there's been a lot of things that have gone on civically and I'm talking outside of the pandemic, just the everything else that went on during the year, whether it be the election cycle, whether it be, the George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery's and the marches and the civil unrest, all of that. If you talk to young people, they would say things like, well, we got to do something. Ain't nobody doing nothing. You would hear that a lot. And as you said, if you don't have these historical benchmarks to look at and say, well, we've been doing something the whole time. Here are lots and lots of examples. We've got people who have, some people say, we need to form our own businesses. We need to get our own jobs. Okay. Well, we need to go to school. We need to educate ourselves. Okay. We just need to, everything that has been said, it's like, okay, we can do that. And we've done that. And here's what happens when we do. We've made great strides. There's no question about it. What I like to say is that if you look at anybody who is in this country who has a slave ancestry, if you really sit and think about it, think about what you have overcome, even if you've done nothing yourself personally, but for you just to exist, what those before you had to go through. Only the strongest of the strong made it through the Middle Passage. So that's if true. You're here, that's in your DNA. So for you to say, well, I wouldn't have done this, I'd have done it like this. You could have done it like that, but guess what? You wouldn't be here. Yeah. If great grandma had done it like that, or great granddad had done it like that, you wouldn't be here. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that can be learned from that. But what I think that we need to do is we need to stop being in camps. We need to stop being, diametrically opposed to either this or either that. Even with the political structure, I don't have a problem, and I don't mean to get into politics, but I just had to say this. I don't have a problem with black Republicans. That's not an issue. Right. My problem was with anybody who was a Trump supporter. That was just my problem.
I understand that. Yep.
So I think we do need representation in all political parties.
We
need representation in factory. We need representation in unions. We need representation in academia. We need all of those areas. We do need representation because we should bring a unique perspective to those institutions. If we are not, we can talk about best ways to do things. These gentlemen, as I said, as we talked about, they never sat down and talked about, I see where you're coming from, but we can kind of mesh those things. Yeah. You look at Tuskegee, for him to have formed that school and for it still to be in existence today, that is a tremendous accomplishment. Yeah. Du Bois, for his undergrad, went to Fisk. For that school to still be in existence today is a tremendous accomplishment. And it's still turning out academics from both schools and all the HBCUs as a cadre. Mm-hmm. Now it's almost chic, to go to an HCB. Yeah. So, and which is, that's great. It's great that they're still in existence. But at the same time, we need to kind of build on those things and build on other institutions outside of that kind of make a collective. Because if we're saying that we are all part of this great, social experiment called the United States of America, then we need to be in all aspects of it.
I got you. And I agree. It ought to be some pepper in every pot. Absolutely. It ought to be some pepper in every pot. Oh man, I'm with you. So I've been doing a lot of reading, man. Is there anything else you wanted to get into in terms of a paragraph out of this essay?
Well, I think there was a little bit here where it says, and I think that's the part I was looking at that where you touched on with the gentleman that he actually named. That was just like, I like the way in these days, they call people out. It was like, I'm going to tell you who I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm going to tell you who I'm talking to. I think you and I kind of touched on that just briefly last weekend on a side conversation. That's not what's happening today. A lot of people put out their thoughts on social media and kind of leave them there, and you're trying to get who they talking about. I'm gonna tell you what I'm saying, what I mean, and you can come for me if you want to. So, But yeah, I think that was the other paragraph that I was kind of looking at. But I think that again, those men that he called out that were in Booker T's circle, depending on, and again, we don't have their writings, we don't have their thoughts, we're just looking at it from the lens of Du Bois, but I think they too would play a great part in disseminating this information to whomever. Again, we look at different civil rights leaders. If we look at King, if we look at Garvey and so forth, they all had people around them who that not always thought exactly like them. If you look at Dr. King, especially in the last couple of years of his life, he had a lot of opposition within his own camp.
Oh, for sure. That Poor People's Campaign was a real thing. It was
a real thing. When he said he was against the war in Vietnam and spoke loudly about that he had a lot of black preachers that said, you can't come to my church no more and speak. So this is one of those things where we can't say that, I would have done it this way, I would have done it that way. It's more of, okay, here's what this man is saying. Even if you don't agree with what he's saying, you still have to look at the bigger picture. You still have to look at what are your ultimate goals here. There's different things. I remember watching a special a few years ago where and it was on PBS, and I can't remember the name of it, but the gentleman was meeting with members of the Ku Klux Klan. That was his way of trying to reconcile.
I know who you're talking about.
It was a very interesting piece, but the part that disturbed me the most was when he met with some young men in Baltimore who had just been marching in the Freddie Gray uprisings. And they called him an Uncle Tom, and they called him, they said, why are you going meeting with these racists, and what you trying to be friends with them? And we human, so they came at him and he came right back at them. So it was one of those things where I was looking at it, and I had never, and while I'm watching this whole special for an hour and a half, whatever it was, their point of view had never come into my mind. It was just interesting to me. It was, now me going meet with the Klan is not something I would do necessarily. That's not my perspective. I got what he was doing. And especially when you had people that had said, well, they had come out of the Klan, they were, just him talking to them had brought them out. And and as you, again, being men of faith, we know that, when you stand up and you preach, if you bring one soul, you've done your job.
Amen.
So it's the same thing here. He's not going to win over, the Ku Klux Klan as a whole.
Not the Klan.
But he can touch one, who can touch one, who can touch one, and so forth. So when they brought that up, I'm going like, why are they jumping on him, like that? But then again, I have to look at it from their lens. If you're 20 years old and you were raised in Baltimore and you see somebody that looks just like you gets murdered by the police and you've had those experiences,
you ain't going to want no conversation.
Don't want a conversation. You want action.
Absolutely.
So,
and that's the call of this generation, right? That we're talking about teens, young adults. They want action. They do. And I think, and so here's what I'll do. I'm going to jump to this last paragraph because I think this sums up this whole essay wonderfully. Because as much as he was critiquing Booker T, he began to kind of, I thought he did a great job bringing it all together in the last paragraph. And so here, I'll read it, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, Carl. So the last paragraph, from the souls of Black folk, the essay, Mr. Booker T. Washington and Others. It says, the Black men of America have a duty to perform, a duty stern and delicate. Now, this is, of course, very targeted towards men because of the age in which this is written, and we got it. This does not count you out, ladies, right? This does not count you out.
I'm glad you put that in there.
He says we have a duty to perform. We have to be excellent. We have to strive to be the absolute best that we can be. A duty stern and delicate, a forward movement to oppose a part of the work of their greatest leader. So far, this is where he actually begins to line up. So far as Mr. Washington preaches thrift, patience, and industrial training for the masses, we must hold up his hands and strive with him. We need to be having these same conversations. Thrift, patience, and industrial training. Let's build ourselves up. Let's be a nation who owns and produces. And you've got to have people that come to us to buy and have within ourselves. Let's be that. He said, we must hold up his hands and strive with him, rejoicing in his honors and glorying in the strength of this Joshua called of God. So as much problem he had with him, he's like, look, he got something in what he's saying. We're not going to throw it all away. We got to acknowledge. And, right, so Booker T. Washington actually has seminary training. He recognizes that some of what he's doing is driven by his understanding of scripture, his commitment to God, his connection to churches. We didn't read it, but Du Bois calls out the African church in the North as having been part of the not just the bourgeoisie, but now the freedmen's struggle and gang. He says this Joshua, he's talking about Booker T. Washington, calls him a Joshua called of God and of man to lead the headless host. We don't have at our host a head. We need somebody that can take the charge. But so far as Mr. Washington apologizes for injustice, North or South does not rightly value the privilege and duty of voting. It belittles the emasculating effects of caste distinctions, that inferiority that was introduced, and opposes the higher training ambition of our brighter minds. Everybody's not going to be working with their hands. Everybody's not going to be a plumber, an electrician. He's like, we need some Black doctors and Black lawyers. We need Black scientists and Black thinkers. He's like, in the end, he's saying we need both. We need Black industrial people and we need Black thinkers at the same time. We need both of these. And so far as the South or the nation does this, we must unceasingly and firmly oppose them. By every civilized and peaceful method, we must strive for the rights which the world accords to men, clinging unwaveringly to those great words which the sons of the fathers would fain forget. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Carl, your thoughts on that before I give my final and we kick it back over to our host.
I like the way he wrapped that up because he gives the governmental framing of that. We are endowed with inalienable rights because we are citizens of this country. You've made us citizens. We are free men. We have all the rights that you have. So we should not compromise those things. Yes, he does give Washington his credit. We appreciate what you're doing. We're going to try to hold you up. But at the same time, let's not give up part of ourselves and part of what is due us in order to make that happen. And I think that, again, this is something that we need to keep in the forefront even now. We have to look at the bigger picture. You're not going to like everything everybody says. One of the reasons why, again, we hear a lot of times, well, we don't have any leaders. We don't have any Black leaders. Yeah, we do. We have a lot of them. Pastor, you're a leader. I mean, you know, we have people all throughout our communities who are leaders. And
you are, brother. You lead your family. You raise daughters.
Well, and that's one of the things that you have to look at too. You have leaders within, even, you know, growing up, you had leaders up and down the block.
Absolutely.
You know, we had men and women that we looked up to, that their names will never be known, in circles throughout the nation, but it's people that left a mark on our lives and taught us certain things, and they were leaders amongst themselves. And as you said, if you head your household, you head your family, you head your community, you have a space in that. And what you can do is look at what these men have laid out, what they've done, use those examples, and kind of go forward with that. And I think that we need to look at more, you know, historical studies rather than saying, well, we need to do it like this and we need to do it like that. Look at what has been done before, and try to modernize it, try to put a twist on it. We are using, as Du Bois is saying, use our intellectual acumen. You know, if you look at what he did and you can improve it, improve it. If you look at what Washington did and you can improve it, improve it. But you have the blueprint to do whatever you need to do in order to have us rise. We don't need to fight against each other. We don't need to have, you know, two different camps. It's either this way or that way. It can be either way. You know, as you said, I'm not a big proponent of marches. I understand why they're necessary. I understand why they still happen, because attention has to be brought to certain issues. But if there's another way to do it, I mean, I can find, you know, historically other ways that things have been achieved. That may be my path. But I'm not going to, you know, discredit those who are, you know, in the streets constantly. I mean, I know there was a march that you put on this summer that you were a part of, that I was also a part of.
Yeah.
That was great, and I have no problems with it. Obviously, but
you were there. Right.
I was there. But at the same time, if that's all you're doing, then we need to kind of look at, look at what lens you're looking at things from. And I think that's what he's saying in that last paragraph. If all you're doing is training to build a better life for yourself and your family, and that's all you're doing, that's all you're concerned with, then what type of legacy are you going to leave? We need to build a little bit further than that. So.
Amen. I agree, brother. I agree. We haven't talked about it much. I'm winding down, Pastor Alicia. I'm winding down. We haven't talked about it much, but I put up a post some time ago, right, asking, is it time for us to abandon the approach of, hailing and raising up and cheering the talented 10th? And is there a better approach? Not that I am against the talented 10th and raising up our brightest minds, but I also believe that we have to do a better job with the other 90 that we cannot leave behind because they don't have a specific acumen towards a certain bent of education or whatever that they're. And so, like you just mentioned, right, is there a better way to do what these men were trying to do from their own personal stance, to identify you it's in you, you're gifted, you're grasping concepts well, you'll be a great surgeon, go, we're going to back you and push you, and just to make it very, very practical, right? But at the same time, listen, I know what I pay my plumber. He do all right. And no shade, I love him, I want him to do well. Right? Because a robot will never be able to do what he does when he comes to my house.
Oh, yeah.
And, a good plumber, certified, licensed master plumber, he'll make well over 6 figures a year if she does her work well. Come on, let's figure out how to move all forward so that legacy becomes bigger than just your last name. Mm-hmm. It becomes a part of who we all are and how we're connected. And I'm not going to make this churchy, but I could. Go ahead.
I just want to say this too, because I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to say something earlier tonight, because I remember that post that you put up about the talented 10th, because I commented on it.
Yeah, you did.
I commented on it, but I have to say in full transparency, I would say 95% firmly in that talented 10th camp.
Yeah.
And that was some years ago when you put that up, if I recall. But since then, I've been evolving. I've been evolving. I'm still very much, I'm still lean that way, but I do understand that there are other ways of us coming up. And I try to keep my mind open to, as you said, looking at that other 90. I think that my angst is that we need to, as you just kind of was saying earlier, make that other 90 know that they have leadership in them as well, and not to just look for a
from
leader.
The 10. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So
the 90 don't have to look to the 10%
exactly
for them. I got you. I'm with you, man. I'm with you. Listen, Black folks, read everything you can get your hands on. Read. There is so much. The old saying, and I'm not gonna say I believe it to be true or not, but the old saying was, if you want to hide anything from Black folks, put it in the book. Right? That we're gonna make that a lie. The devil is a lie. We're going to read. We're going to be well grounded. I think that as Carl and I were looking at this whole thing of Du Bois versus Booker T, that it kind of, and Carl brought this out, they were headed in the same direction, really. They really had the same goal for their people in mind, but they thought they had the right approach from their own individual context. The best route would, and I was like, man, we trying to get to the same place.
Mm-hmm.
I could make that real churchy, but I'm not going to do it. We try to get to the same place. Can you take the best of your ideas? I take the best of my ideas, and we work together to move everybody forward and to make sure we graduate more people than those that will come to you and fight against me, and those that come to me and fight against you. Why don't we pull this stuff together? And so, man, Carl, thank you. I knew this would be good. I appreciate you. Thank you, man. Thank you.
I appreciate you having me. I appreciate it. This is wonderful. This is one. I hope it helped somebody.
Yes. Sister Pastor Alicia, back over to you. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you both so much. I just want to applaud you on this end. And I know we have seen some applause in the comments there. So we just thank you so much. I just really want to quickly just say that I enjoy the parts that you all brought out, because I think it's really relevant to today's time and just how you see everything on social media. There are so many people working, I'm going to say silos. There's so many people working separately and doing their own separate thing instead of coming together, bridging the gap. We talk a lot about millennials in the church, right? We talk about, because the millennials are not even the big deal no more, right? But we are still on this thing of just these two separate different generations. And
now we have
their approach.
We really need to, you're going to get me started on something else.
I know. Yeah, it's just really important.
Keep talking, because you're going to get me started on a whole nother topic.
That's another topic, right?
That's a whole nother topic. I can go on and on.
We can definitely come back. But we want to remember, I just want our young people, our children, our teens, our youth to remember that you don't have to work separately. And I want our older generation to remember, you don't have to work separately. We can all come together. We may not be talking about, we may not be using the same lingo, but if we come together, like you all are saying about these men, and just kind of break down some things, our processings are different. The way that we talk and learn, all of that stuff is different. But if we just take the time, have patience, and just kind of sit there, let's go to lunch, let's do something, let's go skate, and I don't know, meet each other on each end of it, and we can learn so much. I want to quickly say this. My sister, she is a blogger, right? And so one of the things that she mentioned when she first started was just that she was just kind of doing her own thing, and she wasn't getting anywhere. And then she started to put that idea away and say, you know what, let me reach out to some of these that have been here longer. Let me figure out, let me network, let me pull these people together, because that's where I'm going to learn. And she has started hitting goals. She has started reaching some of her milestones and things that she wanted to do. She's got however many followers on Instagram or whatever. And she's growing. And so that's just, I want our children, our young people to remember that there is growth when we put some of those ideas away. From our older people too, there's some growth for y'all too. You know, when you put some of your old ideas away and kind of come together. I love real quick how, Carl, you mentioned about the blueprint. And this is why it's important to read, because sometimes we're knocking our heads trying to do something new when it's already been done. Or we can do building blocks and learn from that. We don't have to start all the way over again. There's a saying that, what do they say? Work smarter, not harder, right? So you can do both, maybe. But you want to work smarter. You want to be able to pull that together. I don't know. I'm from the school of work hard. I'm trying to get rid of that. But if we work together and if we work smarter, then we can. And if we read. Y'all, I just want to re-emphasize that, because that's what the whole point of this was. If we read, and if you don't understand something in a book, man, y'all, we got the best that there is these days. We got Google, we got Siri, we got all these different avenues of ways to be able to break down some thoughts of things that we don't understand.
They are great starting points. I agree. Those are great starting points. But I, if I can, I just want you to push further beyond Wikipedia. I want people to go past Wikipedia and dig in. So much to be learned, so much to be explored. And I look again, I said it earlier, I'll just make a quick repeat. And I got one more thing I want to do before we close, so don't let me forget, please. While we often talk about reading, opening our minds and expanding us, that's a forward-looking thing, but it also is a backwards-looking thing. What's been done? What's been tried? What can we build from so that we don't have to make similar or same mistakes all over again? And if it's there, get the knowledge, get the reading, get the understanding, and build from it, grow from it, and then go from it.
I love that. And one last point I want to say, and stop talking about each other, okay? I mean, if they would have stopped, if one or the other would have just stopped talking about, you know, whatever that person doing over, oh, they think they so smart. Oh, they think they got the best. Oh, this, oh, you know, we can be some real petty folk, okay? But if we put some of that pettyism away, you know, we can do some great things. And so we're talking about Black leaders, we're talking about pushing forward, we're talking about for our own community. Okay, well, let's be about that then. Let's be about that. All right, so I'm done, because I can sometimes talk a long time too. So I'm going to go ahead and put it back in your court, Pastor, and then you can end us out.
Thank you for just letting us talk tonight. I appreciate it. Thank you. Before we go, Carl, please shout out your coffee company. April, I know you're in the comments somewhere. Tag the Facebook page, the Instagram page, the website. Somebody please put it in the comments so everybody watching. I mentioned earlier, Carl started a coffee company. And I want everybody, if you don't drink coffee, buy it for somebody else. But go ahead and talk about it a little bit, Carl.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's brewandbeans.com is our website. It's brew, the letter N, beans.com. That's also our name on Instagram and on Facebook. We do have a presence on both. Just started it, you know, again, you know, as we're talking about here, you know, you talk a lot about let's start a business, let's get our own. And we talk about it a lot, and then we say we have to do it. So we're doing that. My wife is also very active. She has a consulting business that she has, and I see she's putting things in the chat. She can add that as well. We've got some other things that are coming out of our households. Just trying to really, as you said, show our next generation, you know, building blocks. You know, we've worked in corporate America most of our lives. We've seen the best and the worst of it. So just using those experiences for anybody that wants to listen, anybody that wants to, you know, be educated. I can give you as much as I can give you, and I can probably point you in the direction of somebody that can give you a whole lot more. So,
And am I misremembering? Didn't one or your daughters working together on a business initiative?
Yeah, actually, they're working with their mom in the consulting area.
In the consultant, okay,
Yeah,
okay,
so
okay. I
they're
thought they had
doing
launched
that.
something of their own
I
off to the
think
side.
well, stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Okay, I'm being prophetic. I'm gonna stop. Okay.
I'll say that.
Later.
Okay. Pastor Alicia, thank you for connecting us with the National Council of Teachers of English, who sponsored this African American read-in virtual for 2021. Normally, this would have all been, done in libraries and reading rooms and other spaces that we've been able to gather. And so there is this now virtual world that we are seeing overtake much of what we've done. And so this was their initiative, and Pastor Alicia brought it to us as something to consider. It's been good. Thank you for taking us from the youngest of babies with our first author and her granddaughter and their book. Let's shout that out, please. And what do you have that name handy? Her name handy. She's here on Facebook. Talisha Smith. That's it. Lady Talisha Smith. She is an author. And she and her granddaughter written a book. Lanaya Smith have written a book. They were our first readers a few weeks ago. The next week was it was reading by Fonsella Howard, my wife, but she read a book of poems that In My Daddy's Arms I'm Tall. And it was all Black authors all Black poets and a whole collection of poems about fatherhood and its relation to children being raised in the context of African American families. A great, great, great compendium of poems. And then today, as we read through From the Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B Du Bois, the chapter in particular, Mr. Booker T. Washington and others. But get the whole book, get every book we mentioned, support Black authors, and read Black folks read. Appreciate you. Thank you. Back to you, Pastor Alicia. I am done. Thank you.
Okay. I'm gonna, if you all can go back onto YouTube later a little bit. We did have one last question. We're a little over, so I don't know if you want to answer it now because it might spark a whole nother conversation. But we have a question that says, you all spoke about Black leaders. Do we need a Black leader now? So we kind of
speak to it. You want to speak? Let's give us 3 minutes and we'll try to do our best to cut it off. You go first, Carl.
Yeah, we need people that set standards. And I don't want to, there's no one person that can do that because we're not a monolith. So we need leadership, period. And that's just, foundational. We need leadership. So I wouldn't say that there should be one person that's going to speak for everyone because that's not going to happen. I think that there are people that if you look to within your own communities, wherever you may be, you have a Black leader, you have Black leadership that can speak to the needs of the people as a whole, and not maybe your particular need, but if you look at the greater good, I think there are people already in places that you may just have to kind of open your eyes to see that leadership is there. So,
yeah, I agree. Especially the way the question was written. Do we need a Black leader now? Right? I don't think we're in time where we need just a Martin Luther King, just a Malcolm X, just a, Jesse Jackson. I'm not asking anybody to agree or disagree with what these men have said and done. I'm just talking about the place that they've taken up in African American society in the last 50 years or so, right? There have always been names that have been kind of exalted and vaulted as the Black leader. And I agree with you, Carl. I don't think that is certainly not the way people look to live today. That the way we look to live today is that there are leaders in spaces and places over certain areas and not that they rise to say, I'm the leader, but that they feel passion about a certain area. And then that passion about a certain area, concern, or drive then causes people to come alongside and say, I agree with this person. Let's go get this done. Not that this person sits atop of all. There are those, right, who do kind of present as a leader across multiple facets. You can look at, and especially as we look at, African Americans today, both within and without church. There are those that kind of do present themselves, from the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, right, to Jamal Harrison Bryant. You can look across the board and see those who have kind of risen to what people would consider a position of leadership. But even with that, I think there's still a huge diversity of thought that sits up under that and says, okay, we'll follow you on this, but that one, I ain't going with y'all.
And real quick, and I think that when you said that, when you speak of Martin Luther King and so forth, we as Black people in this day and time like to romanticize these fallen leaders. These people were not very popular in their day and time. Martin Luther King was not a hugely popular person. Malcolm X was not a hugely popular person. Marcus Garvey was not a hugely popular person. But we look to those men's philosophies even in today to try to guide our actions. So if you say, do we need a Black leader? We've had them. Use those principles. If those are the principles that you follow, then use those principles to go forward in whatever your endeavors are. If you're looking to, do nonviolent protests, if you're looking to do, self-defense, or whatever your philosophy is that attracts you to those martyrs, and go forward with that. You have your leader. He's already said it. So, and
I think, Carl, you work in corporate America. Pastor Alicia, you also have this experience as we look at generation that is now really taking the stage behind. I mean, I'll be 50 in a couple of years, right? I've done a lot, but there's a generation that is really kind of coming into its own now and beginning to take the stage in a lot of these areas. They don't look at it as one person. They look to be collaborative, right? They want to have a council of ideas that we come together and determine how we're going to do this part. It's not about vaulting one person above another and lifting up a leader and say they speak for all of us. Black people have come too far. We've come too far. We've made gains in so many different areas, and there's so many varying thoughts. And name the topic. I can give you names on both sides of every topic you give me, right? That there cannot be one. And so looking at the way the generation that we're handing the baton to is seeking to work and wants to work and accomplishing much in a collaborative way, I don't think we'll ever see just one name pop up that rules the scene in Black America. And I would dare say neither should it be.
That's right. We wouldn't want that, actually.
No.
That's my thought on it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good question. Thank you for the question. Thank you all. Thank you both so very much. It's such a great way to end our reading series. We are so excited. And so on that note, we're going to say peace to the family. We love y'all. Have a great night.